Welcome to a moderated discussion with Dr. Stephen Kleinberg, founding director of the Kinder Institute for Urban Research at Rice University. My name is Shaheen Lakhani, and I am the MC for today's event. I am currently the Director of Business Development for an online certification program. Prior to that, I taught elementary school for 3 years after receiving my bachelor's in education from the University of Texas at Austin. Today's program is entitled Houston, a Microcosm for America's Future, and is proudly being presented to you by the Ismaili Jamaat Khana and Center. Through the guidance of His Highness the Aga Khan, the 49th hereditary Imam of the Shia Ismaili Muslims, the Ismaili Jamaat Khanas in the United States are positioned to be more than places of worship and spiritual search. They are places of friendship, dialogue, and inclusivity, reaching out to neighbors to facilitate an exchange of ideas. This is achieved through hosting cultural programs such as educational seminars and lectures, art exhibitions, music and dance, and as a forum for civic leaders and others. At the opening ceremony of the new headquarters of the Global Center for Pluralism on May 16, 2017, the Aga Khan explained, and I quote, "Pluralism does not mean the elimination of difference, but the embrace of difference. Genuine pluralism understands that diversity does not weaken a society, it strengthens it. In an ever-shrinking, ever more diverse world, a genuine sense of pluralism is the indispensable foundation for human peace and progress." End quote. These spaces hope to encourage community engagement and collaboration on issues of concern, as well as broadening intellectual horizons. Today is no exception as we seek insights from our esteemed guest, Dr. Stephen Kleinberg. Dr. Kleinberg has been shaping local thought on the ongoing changes in the Houston metropolitan region for almost 40 years. Through his work on the Kinder Houston Area Survey, now in its 40th year, he has tracked the economic outlooks, demographic patterns, experiences, and beliefs of local residents. Under contract with Simon & Schuster, his book, Prophetic City, Houston on the Cusp of a Changing America, was released in 2020. Kleinberg is the recipient of 12 major teaching awards and a much sought-after speaker in the Houston community and beyond. He is a graduate of Haverford College, the University of Paris, and Harvard University. He and his wife, Margaret, have called Houston home since the early 1970s. They have 2 children and 5 grandchildren. Today's discussion will be moderated by Dr. Huma Jaffrey, a nanotechnology entrepreneur who holds a PhD in nanomaterials chemistry from Rice University. Without further ado, please enjoy the discussion.
Well, thank you all so much. I'm delighted to be here and to be able to share with you what we think we've learned from now 40 years of systematic surveys tracking the transformations of Houston. Houston was riding the oil boom. 82% of all the jobs in 1980 were tied into the price of oil. Tenfold increase in the value of oil during the 1970s. Houston was booming. We did a one-time survey. 2 months later, the oil boom collapsed. Houston went into major recession and then recovered into this to be at the center of the 3 fundamental transformations of the 21st century. A new economy where blue-collar jobs have disappeared. The big employers in Houston used to be Hughes Tool Company, Cameron Iron Works. Suddenly, a world of growing inequalities predicated above all else on access to quality education. Theme number 2, an epic transformation in the ethnic composition of the Houston, the Texas, and the American population. And number 3, if Houston's going to make it as a high-tech city ready to succeed in the 21st century, it has to become a destination of choice, a place where the best and the brightest people in America working at the cutting edge of knowledge will say, I want to live in Houston, Texas. So we've been watching these remarkable changes. Let me just touch on the first 2, the knowledge economy, and just remind us of how fundamental these changes have become. Here is the 30 years after World War II. The United States emerged out of that war the sole economic power on the planet. All of our potential competitors were decimated by the war experience. This was a world of big business, big government, big labor. 38% of all the jobs in America were union jobs. The unions could negotiate with the corporations to ensure that workers shared in the prosperity of the companies, and the rising tide lifted all boats. The poorest 20% of American families literally doubled their incomes in real terms between 1950 and 1970, whatever job they had, increasing wealth, increasing every year. And those were the years when we celebrated the stay-at-home housewife mother in suburbia. The average American woman between 1946 and 1964 gave birth to 3.6 children. And the baby boom was launched upon the land, preceded and followed by baby bust generations. So for 65 years, there's been this bulge going through the American system. Demographers talking like a pig being swallowed by a python, not very comfortable either for the pig or the python. The leading edge of those 76 million babies, overwhelmingly Anglo babies. That's who was here to be born in that period after World War II. The leading edge turned 75 this year. And we're going to watch a literal doubling of the number of Americans over the age of 65 in the next 25 years. Every day between now and 2035, 10,000 Americans, day after day, will turn 65. And by 2030, the youngest of the 76 million will have turned 65, heading off into the proverbial sunset, being replaced by a very different generation of Americans. It is a truly epic transformation that I'll come back to in just a second. This is the 30 years after World War II. Here are the last 35 years, when virtually all the benefits of economic growth have gone to the richest 5%, most of that to the richest 1%, and the bottom 60% of American families, after experiencing a doubling of their incomes in the 30 years before then, have basically stagnated over the last 40 years. And all the benefits of economic growth have gone to the richest 20% of Americans. What happened? Why did the economy change so profoundly? Two big things happened. And then a total failure for the last 40 years of our American political system to address those issues, now beginning to recognize this is the critical challenge for the Houston and the American future. Two big things happened. Number one, globalization. Companies can now produce goods anywhere, sell them everywhere. If you're doing a job that I can train a third world worker to do, and I pay that third world worker $15 a day to do that job, I'm not going to pay you $15 an hour. And if you're doing a job that I can program a computer to do, I will soon be replacing your job with an intelligent machine. We are in a new world where education, always a nice thing to have, has become absolutely essential to a person's ability to earn enough money to support a family in the global knowledge economy of the 21st century. Here's one other quick evidence of what we're talking about. This is the analysis of the educational requirements for jobs across America done by the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce. In the 1970s, there were 91 million jobs in America. And of those 91 million jobs, 1/3 you were eligible for as a high school dropout. Another 40% required no more than high school. 3/4 of all the jobs in America required high school or less. And here's what's happened to those jobs since then. And in 2020, 65% of all American jobs now require education beyond high school. Not necessarily 4 years of college, but 1 or 2 years in a community college to acquire the technical skills that can connect you to the jobs of the 21st century. Theme number one, growing inequalities across the board in America and in Houston, predicated above all else on access to quality education. This is Harris County in 1980. There are 1,450 census tracts in Harris County, and in blue are all the Harris County census tracts that were majority Anglo. In red was the census tracts that were majority African American. That's the 3rd Ward and the 5th Ward. Along the ship channel was the Segundo Barrio where the Latinos were, and then a few places around the Beltway with no majority. Harris County 1980, Harris County 2010. Isn't that incredible? No one having planned this, no one consulted me before all these people came. Houston finds itself at the forefront of the demographic transformation occurring across all of America. And this is why we claim that Houston is the most ethnically diverse metropolitan area in the country. The best measure of ethnic diversity is how close does a population come to equal force, to 1/4 Asian, 1/4 Latino, 1/4 African American, 1/4 Anglo. And by that measure, Houston just beats out New York among the 8 most diverse large metropolitan areas in America. All of the successful metro areas have been successful largely because they have been magnets for the new immigration, new urban growth of the last 35 years. But Los Angeles has too few African Americans. Chicago has too many Anglos. Miami has way too few Asians. Houston is where the four communities meet in greater balance, greater equality. All of us minorities, all of us called on to build something that has never existed before in human history, a truly successful, inclusive, equitable, united, multi-ethnic society made up of all the peoples, all the ethnicities, all the religions of the world gathered together in one remarkable place. And here's the Fort Bend County. We think today may be the most ethnically diverse county on the entire planet. You can see the changes in Fort Bend today. At least by 2016, the most recent census estimates, Fort Bend County is now 21% Asian, 24% Latino, 20% African American, 34% Anglo. Meanwhile, Montgomery County is still overwhelmingly Anglo, but less so than it used to be. But Fort Bend County is, of course, truly a remarkable place of equality in terms of sheer numbers and a representation of all the peoples of the world. Uh, and it's not just numbers, of course, it's also ages. So this brings me back to the baby boom discussion earlier. Let's see, I've got babies on the left here. I've got old people on the right. I've got 12 different age categories from under the age of 5 to 75 years old or older. And here is where the Anglos are in Harris County, Texas today. Ladies and gentlemen, the baby boom. It's not until you reach people in Harris County age 63 and older that the majority of people are still Anglos. And at each younger age group, the percentage of Anglos plummets. The percentage of African Americans, Asians, and above all Latinos surges. Here's where everybody else is in Harris County, Texas today. So this is a powerful picture of Houston's present and future, of everybody in Harris County under the age of 20 who will be the workers and citizens and voters and taxpayers of Houston in the 21st century. Of everybody under the age of 20, 51% are Latinos, 19% are African Americans, 9% of are Asians. A grand total of 21% of everybody under 20 is Anglo. So a powerful picture of Houston's present and future. No, where to go with this? One thing, of course, is that 70% of everybody under the age of 20 is African American and Latino. The two groups overwhelmingly the most likely to be living in poverty. We know what poverty does to your ability to succeed in the public school system. It is a statement to make that if Houston's African American, Latino young people are unprepared to succeed in the global knowledge economy of the 21st century, it is difficult to envision a prosperous future for Houston. And the other point to make is that this is a done deal. Close the borders, build your fence, close off America, round up those 10 million people who you think are here illegally and send them wherever you think they're supposed to go. Never again will close off this country so not another immigrant or refugee ever again sets foot on this land. 63-year-old Anglos are not going to be making a whole lot more babies. So you can go to the bank on this. No conceivable force in the world is going to stop Houston or Texas or America from becoming more African American, more Asian, more Latino, and less Anglo as the 21st century unfolds. Nothing in the world can stop that. So the only question our generation has been given is, okay, how do we make this work? How do we ensure that this diversity becomes a tremendous asset that can be as we position ourselves in the global economy and make sure it doesn't end up tearing us apart and becoming a major liability? And here are the differences in levels of education among the four great communities, and then among Latino immigrants separated out. Asian immigrants, 56% come with college degrees and far higher levels of education than Anglos. Never before has a group of immigrants come with such remarkable educational credentials. Meanwhile, African Americans and Latinos have a kind of 50-50 split between those without high school and those with college or more. And Latino immigrants coming with stunning educational deficits relative to the average education of the average American. Asian immigrants, of course, are not homogeneous. And here are the divisions among the four great communities of Asians. The Vietnamese are the most, at 20% without high school, only 30% with college. facing all kinds of challenges in a world where education has become so critical, unlikely to receive help in a language they can understand from a population that thinks all the Asians are doing great. Because most of the other Asians are coming with extraordinary credentials. Filipinos are overwhelmingly likely to be nurses and to have college educations, but less likely to have advanced educations beyond the 4 years of college than either the Indian Pakistanis or the Chinese and Taiwanese. And a remarkable reminder of the diversity. And then just show a few other things we picked up from our surveys over the years. This is religious preferences. And you can see this great diversity. The Vietnamese are overwhelmingly either Catholic or Buddhist. The Chinese are either Protestant or Buddhist, or by far the majority, the most of other Asians saying no particular religious preference. Indians are divided between Hindus and Muslims. Filipinos are overwhelmingly Catholics. And among all the Asians, you see this tremendous variety. This is a haven, a place for all the religions of the world gathered together and building together this remarkable new world that will be the multi-ethnic reality of the 21st century. And we've been watching public attitudes change over time. A few quick things to show you. Question about do you agree, disagree? Refugees who are in danger in their home country should always be welcome in Houston. 64% first asked that question in 2016, and then remarkably 77% saying refugees who are in danger should be always welcome in Houston. Another question we said is, here's a 10-point scale where 1 means very unfavorable feelings, 10 means very favorable feelings. Where on this scale would you indicate your feelings about undocumented immigrants? And the percent giving positive ratings of 7 to 10 went up consistently from 24, 31, 40, 47, 49% in the survey this year. And then what about Muslims or followers of Islam? From 35 to remarkable 60% giving ratings of 7 to 10. A new embrace of this diversity, a new recognition that this is who we are. And this is what makes this such an interesting and wonderful place. Let me just quickly, I know I'm going too long, but there's so much to talk about here. Have these positive changes in attitudes toward immigration come because people have changed, Anglos have changed their minds in Houston, or is it because of cohort succession? Is it that younger Anglos are coming into the world with different views than older Anglos? And the answer is it's a little bit of both, but it's more cohort succession than it is intra-cohort changes in the attitudes within particular cohorts. Here's how we tested this very quickly. U.S.-born Harris County Anglos, all when they were aged 25 to 35, those who were born during the baby boom, those who were born those are the Gen X, 1970, 79, and those are the beginnings of the millennial generation, born in the 1980s. Do you think increasing immigration to this country today mostly strengthens American culture or mostly threatens American culture? Do immigrants generally contribute more to the American economy they take, or do they take more than they contribute? Should the U.S. admit more the same number or fewer illegal immigrants in the next 10 years in the same? What sociologists call a robust finding. However you ask the question, younger Anglos are just embracing this diversity that in a way that we older Anglos are struggling to accept. Here's one kind of reminder of why this is happening. We asked people kind of fun question, you ever been in a romantic relationship with someone who's not Anglo? And the percent saying, yes, indeed, I have, was 58, 61% among Anglos under 40. It went from 52 to 42% for those under 60. And then here it is for us older Anglos, and I'm afraid the hearts get a little smaller. A reminder that we older Anglos grew up in a different world. The world of the 1960s and 70s was a different place than the world of the 1990s and 2000s. There's a law of human nature that says what I'm familiar with feels right and natural. What I'm unfamiliar with feels unnatural and somehow not quite right. Every question we ask about diversity and comfort with diversity and support for immigration shows this pattern with age. It's not among Anglos. It's not education. It's not gender. It's what was the world like when you came of age? And this very similar thing among African Americans. Very similar pattern, reminding us that younger folks in Houston are growing up in a world where this diversity is simply a part of what is taken for granted. And we are falling in love with each other, marrying, making multiracial babies. Of all the marriages involving an Asian in the last 3 years across America, 1/3 involved a non-Asian. Of all the married US-born Latinos in Houston, 28% are married to non-Latinos. There's been a 700% increase in Black-white marriages between 1990 and 2010, moving toward a multiracial world. The fastest growing racial community in America are those that are of mixed races. We are moving into a world where the great challenge for the future of America is less an ethnic divide than it is a class divide. Each community, growing middle class and a growing underclass, predicated on access to quality education. Here's a few other quick things comparing Asian, US born Asians with Asian immigrants. We did 3 surveys of the Asians, 20% of the interviews done in Vietnamese, Cantonese, Mandarin, and Korean in 1995, 2002, and 2011. And the percentage of US born Asians among Asian adults was 10%. Sorry, in 2010 it was 15%. In 20, I'm sorry, in 1990 it was 10%, then it was 15%, and in the most recent survey of 10 years ago it was 33% of Asian adults who were born in the United States. And those born in the United States are more likely than Asian immigrants to have close personal friends who are Anglo, Black, and Hispanic, and by 61 to 32% more likely to report that they've been in a romantic relationship with someone who's not Asian. You can see this remarkable community of highly educated, professional Asians feeling comfortable in close relationships with African Americans, Latinos, and Anglos, and helping to build this multi-ethnic world of the 21st century toward a more inclusive. Okay, so if the city is going to flourish in the years ahead, it needs to grow into a much more united, equitable, and inclusive multi-ethnic society, prepared to capitalize fully on its burgeoning ethnic and cultural diversity. Anise Parker, after she had left the office of mayor, was asked, what most surprised you? She said, it was how international Houston has become. And she was quoted as saying, every language of business spoken anywhere in the world is spoken in Houston by native speakers with global connections. This ethnic diversity is by far the greatest asset that Houston could have as it positions itself in the global economy. Much depends on how this generation speaks to this remarkable convergence of the two forces that have transformed Houston in the 21st century, a new economy where education has become critical, and a demographic revolution. Younger generations embrace the diversity much more easily than older generations, not at all surprisingly. The question is, will this city be able to reverse the trajectory of the past 40 years of deepening economic disparities and make meaningful and sustained progress toward reducing the racial and ethnic divides in income and wealth, and ensuring greater equality of opportunity across the board? It is a central question for the Houston future. Research has documented significant changes. I didn't get to show you all of this. Survey participants increasingly assert the urgent need to make major improvements in public schools. They recognize more clearly than ever that most poor people in America today are poor because of circumstances they can't control, and government programs are needed to strengthen the safety net and reduce the rising inequalities. They are embracing Houston's burgeoning diversity, feeling more comfortable in a world of thriving friendships across ethnic communities, religious beliefs, sexual orientations. They support more stringent controls on development to mitigate future storms, to enhance the area's quality of life attributes, to develop more walkable urban neighborhoods. It remains to be seen whether the region's business and civic leaders can build on these changes in public attitudes to make the collective, sustained investments that will be needed to position Houston for prosperity in an era of economic, demographic, and technological transformation. This is maybe the most interesting and consequential city in America, but the issues it faces are the issues facing all of America. I conclude the final words in the book that summarizes this research. These are the challenges facing all of America. The jury is out, not only for Houston, but for the rest of the country as well. So we're just completing our 40th survey. We're going to continue the surveys into the future to track how we collectively are responding to the tremendous opportunities and the tremendous challenges that Houston faces as the 21st century proceeds. So I tell people, stay tuned. Thank you very much. I didn't mean to talk so long, but this is 40 years of my life, so I'm happy to share it with you. This is a wonderful time of rethinking how do we ensure that Houston is positioned to take full advantage of its diversity and to position itself for prosperity in the 21st century. Pick up the report at kinder.rice.edu from last year's survey. Join us in the lunch out on March 11th when we'll release the findings from the 2021 survey. Pick up a copy of the book. Thank you all very, very much. I'm looking forward to Huma's questions and thoughts as we think about what does all this mean for all of us in the years ahead. Thanks again, and appreciate being invited to join you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Kleinberg, for this riveting presentation. And there is so much to unpack here and talk about. To our audience who is watching us, hello and welcome to the Ismaili Jamaat Khana and Center. As Dr. Kleinberg mentioned in his talk, that by 2050, the entire United States is going to actually be a reflection of Houston, Texas. And this is his work, his lifetime's work of 40 years of surveys, perhaps one of the longest known surveys in Houston, and that he explains to us why Houston is this learning laboratory for America and how we can position ourselves to become part of this vision of the new American future. So this lifetime's work of Dr. Kleinberg is actually captured very beautifully in his book, The Prophetic City, Houston on the Cusp of a Changing America. And Dr. Kleinberg, I have to say, this is such a fascinating read. So, looking forward to discussing this with you. To our audience, once again, Houston and the rest of our country is experiencing an epic transformation, a change in its diversity, a change in its education and its economy, all of which impacts us and our kids as they become part of tomorrow's workforce. So in the next 30 minutes, you will be learning about Houston's changing landscape and its impact on education, culture, the new knowledge economy, and Houston's future workforce and its role on the world stage. So let's get some insights and inside secrets from none other than Professor Stephen Kleinberg. So Dr. Kleinberg, so Dr. Kleinberg, thank you once again. And, Dr. Kleinberg, as they say, that the main difference between America and Europe is that we Americans think that 100 years is a long time. However, the Europeans believe that 100 miles is a long distance. So here in Houston, we're certainly no strangers to distance, as you know. And thanks to our diversity, we also seem to have the benefit of many centuries of cultural practices and insights. So Dr. Kleinberg, what do you see as Houston's key strengths in this rapidly evolving, changing demographics that you talk about?
Yeah, I think that the most powerful positive image that has come out of these 40 years of research is this embrace of diversity. The degree to which Houstonians feel comfortable, in this world, and are able to appreciate the tremendous variety of foods and restaurants and fiestas and enrichment of our lives that has come from the diversity of people who've been pouring into the city and making the city successful and leading the high tech industries and positioning Houston in this new world. And you're right, what you said earlier. Houston is where all of America will be in about 25 years. We're there first. No one planned this. No one said, let's make Houston a laboratory for the ethnic diversity of America. But there it is. And how we navigate this transition. And it's the embrace of the diversity is sort of easy when it happens, with kids in college who meet each other and fall in love. It's more complicated when you say, wait a minute, we've got to make real investments in education to prepare a new generation for the jobs in the 21st century economy where blue collar jobs have disappeared, right? And the big employers in Houston used to be Hughes Tool Company, Cameron Iron Works. You could drop out of high school with a strong right arm and a willingness to work hard and expect to be able to make a middle class wage. Those jobs have disappeared. So it's a combination of the remarkable diversity that is an enormous asset and the tradition in Houston and Texas of minimum spending on education. You didn't need education to make money in Texas. All of our history, the big Texas fortunes were made from land, cotton, timber, cattle, sugar, oil. The source of wealth in the 21st century will have less and less to do with natural resources and more to do with human resources, with knowledge and skills. So it's a combination of those two new forces, a new economy and a demographic revolution, that is the story of Houston and indeed the story of America as the 21st century unfolds. And Houston is in a better position than either Los Angeles or Chicago or Miami or New York to be a model for what all of America can be, as all of America looks like Houston looks today in about 25 years.
So, Dr. Kleinberg, you talk about education being extremely important as we move into the future, and clearly we see that change, right, with Houston, with the oil economy, and as the prices are coming down, as things are changing, becoming, we're going more towards alternatives, right?
Yes.
And at the same time, the reality is that Texas as a state was probably one of the bottom of the 50 states when it comes to education, investments in education. So, and that I believe is also one of your overarching themes in your book that comes out. So when you speak of education, demographics, and successes of Houston's future, what roles do you see schools and educational institutions play into the city's future as we prepare our children?
Well, as we said, that's we have Houston is not going to make it as a major city in the 21st century if it doesn't deal with the tremendous inequalities in access to quality education. And it's a part of the American story, right? We do a wonderful job in this country in the education of the top 15% of American kids. In Houston, you go to St. John's or Kincaid and then Rice University and then a PhD or a law degree or business degree from any of the 20 best universities on the planet that are located in the United States. You're ready to make out like gangbusters in the global economy. You have as good an education as is available to anyone on this planet. We do an incredible job with the top 15 to 20%, and we do an abysmal job of world-class standards in the education of the bottom 60%. That's the big challenge, and it's going to require of us not just more taxes and more willingness to spend publicly. It's going to require all of us becoming a learning society. I tell people, every church in this country, in this city, ought to be providing preschool and after school programs for the neighboring school kids. Every business ought to adopt a school. And all of us need to be involved in what is a learning side, as you were suggesting. Also, the old idea that I grew up with, the one life, one career imperative. You decide what you're going to do at the age of 20, and you do that nonstop, full time until you retire at the age of 65 with a pension. That's not the 21st century. We think the average college graduate will have 4 to 5 career changes. The world will continue to change. Lifelong education. We are condemned to lives of continual learning, whether we like it or not. And so it's a bigger, broader question as we become a learning society, acquiring the technical skills to manage the robots and to build the new technologies that will be critical for Houston's future. You mentioned the transition, the energy transition. Houston has to lead that transition toward a low carbon future, or it's going to be bypassed, and it will be known as the oil and gas capital that fell apart as the world transitioned to the low climate future, the low carbon future. So across the board, the challenge is education, is learning, is investing in new skills, new opportunities, new challenges.
No, absolutely. And then, you talk about this changing, a 20-year-old coming out, or 21-year-old coming out of college, right, will not have the same career, the changes in career. I myself have experienced some of these career changes, right? And I'm not, 50 yet. So clearly, I mean, this is a new reality. This is a new reality. And the way technological changes are happening, as you mentioned, it's at such a rapid pace that one has to keep up with these skills, right? One has to start early. Can you perhaps talk a little bit more about early childhood education and what we as a city, as a community can do? I know you alluded to the fact that churches and businesses need to come up with some programs, right? Can you allude a little bit more about what kind of mitigation strategies that based on your surveys from 40 years that you see are needed and potentially can work for our city?
Yes, and thank you for that question. I mean, one of the moments of truth in education is third grade reading. If you're not reading at the third grade level in third grade, you are 4 times more likely to drop out of high school. And the single most powerful predictor whether you can read at the third grade level is, did you start kindergarten ready to learn to read? And rich kids in Houston start kindergarten 1.5 to 2 years ahead of poor kids. The brain is growing by 60%. That's when the synapses are forming, when you're seeing shapes and colors. And we asked in our surveys in 2 years ago and then this last year, are you in favor or opposed to raising local taxes in order to provide universal preschool education for every child in Houston? Raising local taxes, no. And we were surprised in 2018 that 67% were in favor. In 2020, 50% were strongly in favor of increasing local taxes, and recognition across the board that we need to do this, that this is critical. The best return on investment comes in investing in these kids in those early years. And Houston is behind San Antonio and Dallas in the percentage of kids from poor families who have access to quality preschool education. So even though there's all this support, we're not translating it into effective action. That's the great challenge, is everyone recognizes how important these issues are. No one yet politically is ready to say, vote for me, I'm going to raise your taxes, and we're going to address these issues successfully. Some of these things going through Congress have some new potential here to say, this is the infrastructure investment in our future. And it's absolutely right. It's a critical reality. You start kindergarten a year and a half behind other kids, you never close that gap.
No, absolutely. And there's a lot of research out there. And I think your work perhaps can help us, with all your surveys, all your research as to why, preschool education is so important. But can you perhaps, can we go a little bit deeper perhaps as to, based on diversities, do you see these differences in lower school or preschool educational gaps that then translate itself as to whether one goes to college or goes for higher education or drops out of high school? Do you see any disparities, again, if we were to look at against the backdrop of a demographic change that the city is experiencing?
Well, I mean, the big reality underlying what we've been talking about is the deepening inequalities. The percentage of people who live in poverty. We have the greatest medical complex in the world in the Texas Medical Center. And Houston has the highest percentage of children without health care, without health insurance of any major city in the country. 60%, or in our surveys, 40% said they could not come up with $400 to meet an emergency expense. So it's poverty, it's lack of access to health care and dental care, it's homes that are deteriorating, that people having to move on a continual basis, and people working hard in Houston, locked in poverty, unable to make enough money to get out of poverty. All those things that poverty does to make education much more difficult for poor kids than it is for rich kids. And you can see that more clearly in places like Houston than almost anywhere else, in Texas, as we were saying. So that's the great challenge, and the great reality is we're not going to be able to build a successful society in which the majority of kids are locked out of opportunity. One other quick example: every kid in HISD takes the SAT or the ACT upon graduation from high school, and of all the high school graduates who are African American, Latino, in the last couple of years in HISD, less than 10% passed those tests at a level that indicated that they were of college readiness. Coming out of high school with a high school diploma, unprepared for college level work. And that's a big part of the challenge that goes back to preschool. For education from birth to college, from cradle to career, is what we need to find a way to strengthen dramatically in the next generation. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for Houston to succeed.
And this is our future workforce, right? As you said, like, this is the new minority is the majority, and we need to mitigate this gap to keep Houston as the great city that it is, right? To continue itself into the future, because this is preparation of our workforce. And, speaking of future workforce, speaking of, education and enabling successes for our students beyond the primary and secondary schools, how do you foresee Houston itself being part of the new knowledge economy? We're known to be the energy capital of the world, as you said, right? So can we perhaps be the new life sciences capital of the world with having the largest Texas Medical Center right here, right? Or can we be the new space ventures capital of the world, right? We have NASA here. So can you perhaps talk a little bit more about that upcoming, well, it is there already, but the future of this new knowledge economy, the knowledge society, and the diversity within Houston that can be used to leverage and become part of this new reality?
Can we lead the energy transition? Right?
Yes.
We have the greatest medical complex in the world. Can Houston position itself as the third coast for the life sciences, along with San Francisco and Boston? This is where the new biology is going to be developed. So all that requires it, the best and the brightest kids, people in the country. And it's part of why quality of life issues have suddenly become very important. Houston has no prayer of being a major city in the 21st century if it is perceived by people outside Houston to be not only flat and hot for much of the year, but also ugly and dangerously polluted. And the business community knows that. We've been making enormous progress in building a much more interesting, live, attractive place where the best and the brightest people in America will eventually say, I want to live in Houston. Right. The story of Houston is people all come here reluctantly, yuck, the job is there, we'll go for a couple of years, and then discover actually that this is really a wonderful place to live. So all these things are central to, and it's a wonderfully interesting time. And we got to say the Asian community is bringing enormous skills, and that second generation, 100% American kids with deep ties still to their countries of origin and committed to building a successful multi-ethnic society. It's going to be an enormous asset for Houston, and it's just been remarkable to see the quality of those. This is not a random sample of Indians who have come to Houston. This is just a remarkable group, partly because of what I was talking about. Asians had been banned entirely, and the only way they could get here was to qualify as professionals of exceptional ability, right? And so Houston has enormous amount going for, but it isn't happening yet. I think the big theme of our research is that more and more understanding across the board. We're a different folk today than we were 10 years or 20 years ago. We are much prepared to understand and support new initiatives, new significant investments in building the future of Houston, but we're not making those investments yet. And I hope maybe the surveys can show. Wait, we asked that question, for example, that said, which of these statements come closest to your feelings about the public schools? The schools have enough money, if it was used wisely, to provide a quality education, or the schools will need significantly more money to provide a quality education. We asked that question in the 1990s. Overwhelmingly, 58 to 30% said the schools have all the money they need if it was being used wisely. Today, reversal. 58% say the schools will need significantly more money to provide a quality education. We are a different folk. We're prepared to support different initiatives. We're not doing it yet. So it's an interesting kind of moment. But so much can happen both in the private sector and in the public sector to position the city for success.
No, absolutely. And, we talk about initiatives, we talk about institutions, we talk about significant investment into our future, right, through these educational institutions. And I would say also tertiary educational institutions, right, such as RISE, the University of Houston that we have here in our corridor, right, with the research and the creation of knowledge and that translation into commercialization of that knowledge and job creation, right? So can you perhaps elaborate a little bit more? I mean, from where I see it, we have the Med Center, we have NASA, we have RISE, UFH, we have the ION that has come up now, right?
Innovation Corridor,
Exactly. And then we have TMCX, right? And then we have the Houston Tech Center. So we have all these accelerators, incubators, and sort of that. Can you perhaps...
This is all new for Houston, of course.
This is all new for Houston, and it's growing as we speak, right? So can you perhaps elaborate on the role of these institutions and what else needs to be done? Or what is the 10, 20, 30-year trajectory that you foresee of these institutions, and how can our youth perhaps take advantage of all of this?
Well, exactly right. I mean, that's one of the most exciting things that's been happening. It's a internalization of the future, a recognition that the source of wealth is knowledge. It's no longer natural resources, which is the basis for the wealth. The reason why Houston and Texas have been successful had nothing to do with knowledge. One quick example is that when the Puritans landed in Boston in 1620, by 1633, they had founded Harvard University. When Anglos settled in Texas in the 1820s, it was not until 1900 when they founded one public library.
Wow.
Totally different sense of the importance of theoretical knowledge and learning. And now we're playing catch up. We're competing with Boston that has Harvard and MIT, or Harvard and MIT and UCLA and Boston College and BU, and we're competing with Los Angeles that has Caltech and UCLA and USC. Houston has Rice, it has U of H, and it's got these technology centers. And those centers have got to play a major role in positioning Houston as a competitor in this process of building the technologies of the 21st century. And we're playing catch up. but we're playing it, and we're seeing the importance of it. This and again, I think it's going to be very interesting to watch how we address education and support systems and centers at that level, while we also address education at the level of early childhood, and ensure that Houstonians in general are prepared to succeed in this new world.
No, as you said, cradle to career. We need to bridge that gap, and then from career onwards, right? That involves a whole different setup, right?
Continual learning.
It's an ecosystem that needs to come together and enable people, right? And as you say in your book, you mentioned that this is critical for our society for Houston, I guess, to continue to be this large, fourth largest city in the country, right? To continue that trend, we need to invest in these projects and our youth and our kids, right? So, I'm shifting gears slightly, but I understand that these are overarching themes and they're all connected, right? You talk about urban planning in your book, and you talk about the shifting attitudes of Houston regarding the interaction and the feel that we have within the city and its architectural landscape. Can you perhaps elaborate a little bit more and talk a little bit, go a little bit deep more and talk about these shifting attitudes on this change that people are feeling based on your surveys as to why they're feeling that, and how is it important for Houston to embrace this change rather and make this shift to continue its economical growth?
Well, one of the things that's so interesting about Houston is that this is, by some measures, the most spread out, the least dense, the most automobile-dependent city in all of America. The greater Houston metropolitan area, or the city of Houston, first of all, covers 600 square miles. You could put inside the city limits of Houston simultaneously, I kid you not, the cities of Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Detroit. Those four cities cover the same geographical space as the city of Houston, and they contain 5.5 million people. City of Houston contains 2.2 million. Then you go out to the greater Houston metropolitan area, the CMSA of Houston, the 9 counties cover a geographical space of more than 10,000 square miles. That is almost as large as the entire state of Massachusetts, and considerably larger than the state of New Jersey. This is the blob that ate East Texas, built on a crummy little bayou 50 miles from any natural barrier, no mountains, no forests, no rivers, a developer's dream, built by, for, and on behalf of the automobile, made possible by air conditioning, and we spread everywhere. We've created a civilization totally predicated on the automobile. We've been asking people in our surveys, if you could choose how you wanted to live, what would you prefer? And 50% opt for walkable urbanism, as opposed to a single family residential area or an area with a mix of developments, including shops, workplaces, and restaurants. And we're beginning to move in that direction, partly because I remind people we're a different folk today. When we all went out to the suburbs and built this sprawling metropolis in 1970s, 1/3 of all American households had 70% of all American households had children living at home. By the end of 2010, it was 1/3, and the census thinks by 2020, when you complete our count, about 1 in 4 households will have children at home. Whole bunches of us are empty nesters. The kids are grown up. I work downtown. I love the ballet and the symphony. Do I still want to drive 2 hours every day? We're attracting the millennial generation, the young creatives coming to work in the high-tech world. They don't want to live out in the suburbs. They want all the variety, walkability, diversity that only urban life can provide. And the fastest growing age segment of the American population are men and women over the age of 80, growing faster than any other population. And we haven't seen anything yet, right? The baby boom generation turning 76 this year, heading rapidly into senior stuff. I'm not sure I want all those 80-year-olds or 85-year-olds having to drive everywhere in Houston, Texas. So we are reinventing ourselves in that way as well, and building. It's no longer a city and suburb. It's a multi-centered metropolitan region. It's called the MCMA. MCMR, multi-centered metropolitan region, with 8 to 10 centers like the Woodlands and Sugarland and the Galleria that have populations close to downtown San Diego. 8 to 10 of them, all over the place, where it's city and suburb interconnected in ways that reflect the new America. And when those millennials have their children, they're not going to have 3.6 anymore. They're going to have 1.7, I think. And so it's a rethinking of the city and rethinking of who we are as Houstonians and what we're looking for and hoping to develop. And that's, again, a big part of the reimagining of the city that is going on in the 21st century.
So, alluding to the same point, right? You talk about, and it's mentioned in your slides as well, right? Like this new America, kids now who are being born, a lot of them are being born of mixed ethnicities or mixed races, right? It's no longer very, so our future, the future of Houston, right? All these kids coming up, They are very ethnically diverse, culturally diverse, right? And now we have this whole MCMR that you talk about, right? This urban planning, and which has to be reflective of the people who live there. So what role do you see, how should we be thinking about pluralism and celebrate this differences of cultures, this plurality, through architecture, arts, dialogue, and institutions that allow for that? What are your thoughts on that?
And
what else would
food,
be, I guess?
Food, of course, and restaurants, and music. The opera, has pioneered in this mariachi operas to reach out to Latinos and to realize how operas are stories told in music. They don't have to all be European stories, and we can celebrate the common human that is there across the board. That's right. I mean, that's what makes it's hard to be pessimistic in Houston when you see the speed of that embrace, and especially when you see the younger Anglos just sort of, what's the big deal here? This is what I love about Houston. This is who we are. And it's us. I tell you, you got to be gentle with us old Anglos. This is a big change. Those are just totally gone. So it's and every question we ask over the years shows increasing support, increasing celebration, increasing embrace of that diversity. And the real challenge is inequalities predicated on education. So one of the things I remind people of is that the one demographic in America that has been suffering the most in the last 10 years, the one demographic whose life expectancies have dropped, who are dying prematurely of what economists call the diseases of despair, suicide, drug addiction, obesity. It is white men with high school educations or less, living in small town and rural areas, watching the world pass them by. My father worked in the coal mines, my grandfather was in the steel mills, no jobs for me. And everyone's paying attention to blacks and Hispanics and Asians. No one's looking to Anglos. And that's part of the great challenge for America, is to build a world where everyone has a better chance to succeed. But it's a class divide. It's a division by education. It's a growing middle class and a growing underclass simultaneously in all four of the major communities, right? And so that's where it's still, ethnicity matters, of course. We're a racist nation. And so the deep inequalities that blacks and Latinos experience comes out of that history. But more and more, it's the solution is access to quality education from birth to college, as you were saying.
Absolutely. And they say, right, that the education is the civil rights movement of our time. That's how important it is, right? And it is important, as we can see, to mitigate this gap, to do whatever it takes to bring everybody together, because this is our future. We cannot, you cannot have a certain percent grow and the rest not. It is extremely important. Otherwise, we won't survive.
And my hope is that the surveys show us that people see that, understand that today in a way that they didn't 5 or 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
And so we are able to do things collectively to build the Houston future that we never would have thought the Houstonians would support, but they will support if it's done in the right way.
So Dr. Kleinberg, as we wrap up, right, you talk about the support where everyone needs to work together, right? That is crucial, as you just said, right? So what comes next for Houston and for all of us is extremely important to ensure Houston's leadership within the nation and also across the globe, right? So in that context, what kind of strategies and support systems, whether they're in the form of institutions, civic partnerships, volunteering, general public education, or leadership, right? Leadership, government interaction with the civil societies and its residents, right? What do you think is needed in the next upcoming decades, and how do you foresee this unfold, this partnership amongst, all of us?
Yeah, and how do we, there's that old saying, nothing fails like success. We were so successful with an ideology of minimum regulations, minimum attention, dig a hole in the ground, produce the oil, who cares what the big issue is going to be, who's going to lead the energy transition? And will Houston be able to move forward in that with those new technologies and with carbon capture and sequestration, with super batteries? I mean, all the things that are going to be critical in fueling an economy that no longer depends on burning of oil and gas that has been the basis for Houston's wealth for more than 100 years. Can we lead that transition? In the next 3 or 4 years, that will become clearer. And it's one of the central questions for Houston's future, I think, as we go forward. And can we build on the growing embrace of diversity and the growing recognition of the importance of education across the board to make the investments, both public and private? And Houston has wonderful philanthropy, and it's one of the most volunteer-oriented cities in the country. Can we throw people at these problems as well as throwing money at these problems? And can we rethink what we need to do to succeed? And there's room for some real optimism and some real skepticism in terms of how that's going to play out. And all of us have a role in making the city work. And the other thing that gives some reason for hope here is that people complain in our surveys, because we invite them to, about crime, pollution, the traffic, the weather, the no mountains, the hot summers, the flying cockroaches. We say, well, how would you rate the Houston area as a place to live? It's a wonderful place to live. People in Houston, often coming here reluctantly, end up really believing in Houston and feeling we get a bum rap in the perceptions of the rest of the country. And that's another great strength in this city, that we can make this work. We are the future of America in a very real way demographically. And can we also be the future of America technologically? Can we be the future of America in terms of education? And so that's gonna be the interesting question as we go forward.
No, you highlight, I think your surveys highlight some very, very important points that we need to consider as we go through as a city in our development process, right? And it's time to go ahead and hit that restart button, right? And think of all these things. But, and I think your surveys help point that. I think your surveys will help educate the public and bring all the resources that are necessary to enable these processes and to put them in place, right? But on that note, I can tell you, when you talk about demographics and diversity, and Houston being this multi-ethnic fabric, right? And the restaurant scene and the cultural scene and the arts and the music scene, right? Whenever I have friends visiting, or my friends who moved from either New York or the West Coast, right? They find Houston to be a home. They love it. They actually say, this is home. We would like to be here. They like the pace of life, and they like the diversity of people. And so I think you're absolutely right. This is the changing face of America, and we are a learning laboratory. And Dr. Kleinberg, with that, we will conclude our talk here. On behalf of our viewers and the Ismaili Jamaat Khanaan Center, I wanted to thank you for your lifetime's work, 40 years of survey on Houston, one of the longest surveys. And thank you for sharing your thoughts and insights as to why Houston is this learning laboratory and its future, and how we can all be a part of it. So thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you. It was great discussion and wonderful. This is the most interesting and consequential city in America. So we all have a responsibility to make sure that it positions itself in the right way for the 21st century.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kleinberg. It's been a pleasure.
You too.
Thank you, Dr. Kleinberg, for a truly engaging discussion. Having the opportunity to discuss your thoughts related to education, workforce, and other key areas based on your insight into almost 4 decades of public opinion has been quite insightful. On behalf of the Ismaili Jamaat Khanaan Center, thank you again for your time. We also want to thank each and every one of you, our participants, that joined virtually here today. We hope that you found the program to be as valuable as we did. To get more information about the Ismaili Jamaat Khanaan Center, please go to the.ismaili in your web browser, or for more information on upcoming programming, please go to facebook.com/the Ismaili USA. We look forward to sharing future programming with you. Thank you and good evening.